do the introduction, and then we'll see where we go from here. Just one other thing. So two things, I guess. One is I usually have better lighting, but I rearranged my office and I haven't put lights up here. So my intent is actually, you can see the chair over here. My intent is to start recording from those chairs and then just have like a screen where I can look stuff up while we're going. But I'm about halfway through it. So most people don't watch the video anyway, so that's a non-issue. But yeah, the other thing is it uploads as we go. So if there's any kind of internet glitch or anything on your end, it does record to local storage and then it pushes it up over the web. So after we're done, you need to stick around until you're done uploading. So
No worries. I am on a slightly spotty internet connection because I'm in a rural area, so there might be a little bit of issues, but let's see how it goes.
I'm curious, where are you at?
I'm in Denmark, so I'm from Denmark. I live in Switzerland. I actually just drove up to Denmark today, so quite a drive, and yeah, just in a rural spot here.
Very cool. My great grandmother was from Denmark. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so we're cousins, but who's keeping track?
Great. That's pretty far back U.S. history, I guess, right? Great.
Yeah, it's around the turn of the century, I think.
Yeah, big immigration. So, cool. Well, if you haven't been, it's definitely worth a visit, and it's very friendly.
I would love to go, and I want to go see the town that she was from. I mean, it's a tiny town in Denmark. I don't even remember what it's called, but it's, yeah. I went and looked it up on the map, and it's like 300 people or something. So now, so anyway, all right. Let me do the introduction, and we'll get going.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, folks, welcome back to another episode of JavaScript Jabber. This week, I'm your host, Charles Max Wood, and we are here with Matthias Madsen. And Matthias, do you want to just let people know who you are? I know you're the CEO at Hole Punch. You do the peer-to-peer stuff, right? You've got some other stuff going on, but who are you? Like, what's your story?
Sure, yeah. First of all, thanks for having me. Awesome to be here. I always love to talk about JavaScript. Basically, so yeah, like you said, I'm the CEO at Hole Punch now, but first and foremost, I'm always like a JavaScript hacker. I've been doing JavaScript for 10, 15 years now. I started when I was in university. That's when I started programming. We had mandatory Java at some point. I Googled Java and I got JavaScript and I started doing that, and I never looked back ever since. I've been a pretty significant contributor to the Node.js project. I've done tons of open source modules for NPM. I think I have around 1,500 on there now, so it's like quite a significant amount. I usually say if you have bugs, I'm sorry, because I probably made some of those. I am a big lover of JavaScript because I think it's one of those languages that are just ugly enough that people use it to make things where the point is not to write code, it's to write things, if you know what I mean. It's not art, it's like engineering, which I kind of like. And I use it a lot to do all kinds of things. Like I said, 1,500 modules, but I'm especially in love with it for doing distributed systems and peer-to-peer, because I think it's a perfect candidate for that. Because it runs everywhere, it's easy, it's very good at moving data around with the abstractions. So I've done a lot of that, and recently, 3-4 years ago, I started a company with a couple of friends called Hole Punch that is focused around peer-to-peer engineering with JavaScript. So it's really fun. We've been going for a while. We are growing a lot, and so now we're just doing all kinds of things with JavaScript and native code and mixing that in with the JavaScript and making like crazy peer-to-peer things. Tons of fun and tons of really cool projects. We're really trying to disrupt the status quo, and it's going quite well.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd love to dive into some of the peer-to-peer stuff. Are you doing like WebRTC, or is it different than that?
So it's really funny because I actually think when I think about my transition in JavaScript, it's kind of like experience in JavaScript. The more I've done JavaScript, the more I moved away from the browser and more like just writing JavaScript outside the browser and outside the browser APIs, which I think is a journey that a lot of people have because the language is just really good for that. So as anybody else, I've done a lot of dabbling with WebRTC and building things like that in the browser. But at Hole Punch and me in general, I'm very into like building serious technology that is like, not that WebRTC isn't serious, but like things where we can kind of like, WebRTC is usually built to like tag on things to like another app. It's kind of like, it has like a chat, a video thing and stuff like that, but it's not really meant to be the backbone of your application. So we're like more about building things where everything is peer-to-peer, is like as a primitive built into everything. So you actually don't do HTTP, you don't do TCP, you only use peer-to-peer data structures, but with JavaScript that do that. So we actually don't do any of that, but we build a ton of primitives out for doing like, like hole punching. That's part of our name in the company. That means connecting people behind firewalls like you do in WebRTC, but like much better because the WebRTC stuff is a bit dated there. Moving terabytes of data around with that kind of stuff, media files, and this is my favorite thing about JavaScript, presenting that to like users with some APIs that are somewhat familiar with them, so they can just do what JavaScript is also really good at, like building UIs and plugging that data in, which is very hard skill to have also, and we have a lot of talented people in that in the community, obviously. So we're like about like JavaScript end to end, and then like allowing people to build applications. Obviously, there's a lot of C and C++ in there also to make that stuff go around.
Right. Sounds good. So yeah. So you're not doing WebRTC. You're building BitTorrent and Dropbox.
Yeah, and actually, I started when I first started dabbling in peer-to-peer. I built a peer-to-peer client for BitTorrent because I was like, that's like a fun little thing to do, and that was a crazy cool experience. I always tell this to people.
That
if
would
you're ever
be
interested
fun.
It is really fun because BitTorrent has one of those things. So I did it like, that was like 10, 15 years ago when BitTorrent was really, really big and it was everywhere. And like, the Pirate Bay was a website you could go to. Now I think it's probably blocked everywhere.
Yeah, I don't know, but yeah. Not that I've ever used Pirate Bay because I would never do anything illegal.
That's good for downloading Linux, I heard.
There you
but
go.
it was really cool. It was really cool for that whole, experience where you just sit on your laptop, you're like, what should I play with? But all the data is actually out there because it's distributed and everywhere. So you can kind of just sit there and build a little program on your computer. You can go to Wikipedia and just read the spec. It's actually not very complicated once you understand the first bits of it.
Right.
And I just spent a couple of weekends in a row doing that. But I mentioned this many times on other interviews, but like that whole feeling of like, it's just me, my computer, JavaScript, everything is everywhere at once. I can just sit here and write code and never have to deal with anything else. That was like, that triggered me massively to dive into this. And I built a little torrent client from that. That's still out there. It was called PureFlix. It got pretty popular. But it was like a crazy good experience. And I never looked back ever since.
Right. Makes sense. So we're going to be talking about the bare JavaScript runtime, but you were talking before about the pair system that you have for peer-to-peer stuff. And one thing that I was curious about is because I'm going to ask you what it is, but I also want to figure out what it is and then how that led to you creating another runtime, because it seems like we've got Node and Dino and Bun, and so you're doing something maybe a little different. Why does that lead you to, we need another one of these things?
Yeah, exactly. So like I said, I've been doing Node. I love Node for a long time, and we built out our entire stack as like Node modules like anybody else. With some native code and stuff. Node has a really good native language of interfacing with C and stuff that we're big fans of. And we built all that stuff out. It was great. And at some point, as anybody else who builds Node.js apps, you want to distribute them, right? So you make an app, this bunch of modules. Modules are really easy, and you want to make an application. And actually, like making an application is, I think, still surprisingly tricky. It's like where if you're building a web application, there's tons of stuff out there for that. Like you can make a little app, and maybe you can go and get a server and you can host Nginx and whatever. But if you want to make something that's like a desktop app, you can use Electron, but it's the process that once you start doing all the bits, like, making the app, packaging it up, getting the stuff in there, getting the native stuff to run, distributing and getting updates in there, getting that to run, it's not as simple as making a node module, and like it's a real investment. So you end up just making one app where I would normally make like 100 modules. I probably made like one or two apps because that investment is just so intense every time. So we had all the code for peer-to-peer. So we decided like, why not make an engine? That's what the pair system is. Pair and bear, we like to make puns on that. So it's two different things. But the pair system was like an idea to say, what if we instead you could just make kind of like you make a module or like a website, you can just make a little thing on your computer, it just has the modules, you run it through this cool thing, which is called Pair, that you can go to pairs.com and you can try it out, and it just packages that up into like a little app with all the tooling, and then that app is distributed peer-to-peer on our peer-to-peer network. So like you don't have to have any like hosting or anything. You can just kind of like you do with like I said, with normal things, you just package it up, you run a simple command, and you get a link out, and that link, if anybody else has this runtime installed, they can just paste it and they can run the app anywhere. And then instead of spending tons and tons of time making it, you can just make them as easy as you make modules. And like, again, no hosting cost, no anything, because it's just distributed peer-to-peer, like, in BitTorrent. So we deep dive on that quite a bit, and we made something really cool for that, which is, like I said, called Pair, that does all that stuff. It's super cool. And as part of that journey for us, and I think this is actually a huge missing step of JavaScript, we were like, it's super cool to make these apps, right? So we have an app that we built, and that called Keat, which is a chat app we do that is a peer-to-peer chat app. It's super cool also. It's building all this stuff. As Node.js developers, as soon as you make an app like that, and you make it and it's cool, it looks great, and it has all the cool stuff, the first thing people ask you is like, cool, when is it on mobile? Right. And the answer was always like, oh yeah, we don't have a mobile team yet, and like we gotta scale it up. And it was like, that whole feeling when it's like a fork in the process comes to some degree. Like we have all this stuff figured out for doing desktop development and making cool Node.js things for desktop and for servers, but like getting that stuff to run on phones was just like, you would find some like 2-year-old project that maybe got something to work at some point and it hasn't been maintained because it was an experiment and stuff like that. So, and there was already really good, UI tooling on mobile. Like native is really good. Other things are really good on phones to make UI apps. Kind of like React is really good on desktop for making UI apps. So we were really missing that part. We're like, well, what about the backend? So in peer-to-peer, the backend runs everywhere. Like you don't want to run that on the server, you want to run that on the device. But the backend has much different capability needs than a front end. Like it needs to be able to load native code, so you can like do stuff like video transcoding if you want to do that on the phone. Do stuff like native networking if you want to do that on the phone through modules. So we very quickly decided like, let's try to get Node.js running. And we just couldn't do it because it's just not made for it, and the module system is not made for it. And like making builds for us, like again, I totally started to understand why these projects pop up and like never really go anywhere, because there's too much stuff, there's too much things to fight, and so instead we were like, well, actually, what is the thing we really love from Node.js? And for us, that's like the module system, npm. That's amazing. It works. It's like one of the most well-designed things ever. And the native systems for Node, like how to interface from Node to C. It's a thing not a lot of people do, but when you do it, you're like, it's amazingly well-designed, Node is. So we're like, what if we just made a new runtime that actually didn't have any of the other stuff? Because all the other stuff was actually what made it hard. The other stuff is like things like HTTP bindings, things like file system bindings. Even though that sounds kind of insane not to have it, that's the thing that makes it really hard to port. And instead just had a module system. So no APIs, a module system, a native system, and then it had a stated goal of saying, with those two things, how can we make something that actually runs everywhere? So like something that you can write a module once, it runs on desktop, a mobile phone, your smart light bulb, if it has this runtime, anywhere. And we made this little thing for our peer-to-peer engine Pair. And at some point we were like, wow, this is actually insanely cool by itself. So we decided to split it up into Bear. So that's why the Pair pun came in. So we officially released this, I think it was last week. It's been really exciting. So that's the Bear.js runtime. It's Bear because it does nothing, but does everything. So it only ships a module system. It only ships this native thing, and then we already made like 200 modules for it. So If you want to use like file systems, you just install a file system module that runs again because it's using these bindings everywhere. On mobile, we use a binding for push notifications. That's a thing. You obviously don't want to use that on desktop. Then on desktop, you want to do other things like maybe run an HTTP server. You can do that. You can also do it on mobile. And we just did this because we wanted to unlock our own development. I am a big believer in modular design, and that's part of it. But I was very excited when we did it because I was like, wow, this is actually what I've been missing my entire JS career, I think. So it's super cool and super interesting, I think.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm curious about, just to start off with, is so it's a bare bones JavaScript implementation as opposed to, say, Node or Bun or whatever that pulls in a ton of stuff. I mean, sometimes that ton of stuff is nice to have, but yeah.
It's basically saying, flipping it around a little bit and saying it's just JavaScript without anything. So like JavaScript without anything. It's actually hard to define, right? Because I don't even think like where does the specs stop and end, because stuff like WebRTC, people might think that's part of JavaScript because it's there in the browser, but it's not really. It's something. It's like a different spec. It's not a language thing. But then there's other things where you're like something like a typed array in JavaScript. Like the UNA array, is that part of the language? And that's very part of the core of the language. It's actually really hard as unless you like really go into it, like what is JavaScript, what isn't. So for us, we were like, we just want something that just runs the JavaScript and has the only thing baked in is like a module system. You want to be able to somehow load things. So like import, is very important. And clear rules about how that import works. So we still follow the node modules algorithm, which means you can install things from npm because then you get free compat and stuff.
Right.
But everything else actually, and might be a little bit controversial, but everything else actually just makes your life harder. Because like if you have something like a file system built in, like in Node.js you can do require FS if you get a file system.
Right.
That's something where you're like, wow, that's a feature, and it is a feature. But for me as a developer, it's also what's the word? Liability. Because if you just get that from the runtime, if the runtimes give you that API, what's the version of that API you're getting? Like, are you getting the latest one that's like in Node 24, or are you getting the one from Node 18? Well, you might know it because you installed Node on your computer, but if you're running it on somebody else's computer, you don't know. So as that API changes, it becomes actually really hard to code against. And the only solution is that API basically never changes, which is then why we have a lot of the stuff in Node.js where we're like, why is the FS module still using callbacks, for example, as the default? Well, that's because we don't want to break all stuff. If instead there is nothing built in, only the JavaScript spec, which is very built around never changing, and you then load modules, then modules can just change. You can just kind of like React changes all the time, right? You can just publish a new major version, and then people on the old major version can just stay on that one. That's fine. And then people who want to get the new stuff can just move to the new one, and you never break anything. So you can just have this rapid iteration of like crazy designs that never break anything in practice. The plus side of that is then you also don't have to ship that code around. So that's really useful for stuff like mobile, where you have different kind of footprints. Like on mobile, if you're running an application that uses JavaScript on the mobile, maybe you don't want to load like OpenSSL from Node.js because you're not using it. That's a big dependency and liability, and also something you have to get approval for in the app stores and things like that. Or if Node adds something else, you just want to run the JavaScript and you just want to pull in exactly what you need. So that was our design goal from the beginning. And for me, that's one of those things, again, when you hear about it, it sounds like an anti-feature, but I think it's, the meme with the normal distribution with the guy in the middle. It's kind of like no modules on both ends, and the guy in the middle is like, I love all the modules. Like you actually want to have nothing shipped with your runtime. You want to have nothing shipped with your runtime, and then you just want to pull in all the things. And I'm talking a lot, but I'm excited about it. But like, an added benefit of that is like, for example, if you look at something like Bun, I think Bun, it changed course a little bit, but one of the original things about Bun that was like a cool thing was like, it's not based on V8, it's based on JavaScript Core, I think. The one from WebKit. Yeah. And it has different profiles and it's very good at other stuff, and like V8 is better on other stuff. So it's kind of like, there's like a matrix for you. Like you want to use JS Core, well, then you should probably use Bun. You want to use V8, you should probably use Node. When you do a runtime like this, where basically you're saying there's nothing in here except the language and the module system, then changing JavaScript implementations is all of a sudden really easy because you're not really doing much except for that. So our guys made a cool little library called lib.js, which is basically just like a binding, an abstraction layer for any engine, because that's really easy to define.
Okay.
And that means that in there we can support any JS engine basically. So we already have it working on V8 because V8 is awesome. We have it working on JavaScript Core. So if you want to use that on iOS, you can just run that seamlessly. Samsung made this really cool JavaScript engine. I don't know if you know it, called JavaScript, which is like a JS engine based for embedded systems. So it runs in like 0.5 MB of memory, obviously like slower than other things, but like it means that it can actually run on things like light bulbs and stuff. Bear runs with that straight up.
Oh, that's cool.
And you as a module author, when you write modules to Bear, you don't know any of this. You just write JavaScript, but it just runs on this straight up. So you can actually take any Bear module out there. So you can take out, we had made a module for file systems called BearFS, which is just a module you can download. So you can actually install that and run that on JavaScript and run it on a light bulb, or you can install that and run it on JS Core and run it on iOS, or you can run it on V8 or whatever. And I think that to me was like, wow, this is where this is gonna, once people realize this, is like, this is gonna be crazy.
That is crazy. Yeah, I'm imagining, I mean, you kind of go nuts. You put Spider Monkey on there,
Yeah.
Whatever floats your boat. That's interesting. Yeah. So
it's like, just to add on that, because it's almost like, I think it's one of those things where people don't realize almost like the implications of that. But for example, like if you do mobile development and you want to run something that reacts to a push notification on iOS, that's something you can do. On iOS, you only have like 20 MB of memory to do that.
Right.
Not to be nerdy, but like that's a requirement. So if you run V8 with that, it's like V8 takes 15 MB of memory. You have 5 MB of memory for application. You feel like the guy who's like programming the program to go to the moon, right? You're sitting there optimizing every line to like make it fit.
Right.
In like 2025, it's insane. So what we do is we just swap it out for JavaScript, same code. Boom, memory goes down. It's the same as writing it in C, basically, because now it's like footprint is very small. It runs slower, but doesn't matter. It's in the push notification. And now we can do all the things, right? So it's like you can pick your battles. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So let's talk about mobile for a minute, because I mean, we've done shows on things like Capacitor or Ionic, right? And so those just use the web view, right? And then they connect to stuff through the JavaScript core bridge on iOS, and it kind of does the things. And yeah, running some of these other engines, I mean, there are languages you can't run on iOS because it does. There are various reasons. I'm not going to get into them, but some of it's because it opens the gate to certain security things, or they can't sandbox it properly, and sometimes it's because those languages just take up too much in the way of resources. But when you get down to other things like React Native, I mean, they work almost exclusively across that JavaScript bridge, but they're still using the runtime JavaScript that's built into the phone. And it sounds like what you're doing here is you're actually saying, hey, we've got this other JavaScript engine that you're going to run as part of your app. And I'm assuming if you deploy an app to the App Store, it ships with the JavaScript runtime embedded in the app along with everything else. And so my question is, you're nodding, so I'm assuming I'm getting it right. My question is, what kind of limitations are there to this? And then the other question is what kind of advantage does it give you? Because I'm aware that some apps, depending on if it's JavaScript, the iOS, for example, thinks of it as an asset, a static asset, as opposed to, or at least they used to, as opposed to, part of the app. And so you could actually do a hot reload and things like that with it. And I'm wondering, like, what doors does this actually open beyond sort of performance and having my app run there and on the desktop?
So yeah, super interesting. It's actually, you're very, very much on the right track here. And in general, so for example, our app, our chat app Keat, which is our flagship app where we deploy all this. It's a React Native app, and we have a bunch of React Native developers who are very good at making stuff. React Native, I'm a big fan of React Native, and
Right.
the way they do stuff, and like it's a really cool project. Very, very, still very underrated project, because people just hear JavaScript, and sometimes how people are to freak out, but it's like
Yeah.
it's incredibly well designed. So we actually run the way you described, where we run and we have a module for this with React Native that just integrates the runtime with React Native. So it does the hot reloading. So whenever you update the code, all that stuff, it works like magically well. Super cool. So we run our runtime next to the React Native runtime, kind of like you would run a backend normally, right? So you have like a separate process. Normally it runs on a server. We run it on device because we use it mainly for peer-to-peer, but you can use it for all kinds of things. Where you then ship the runtime with it. It's not that big. It's like, I think it's like 10 megabytes. The reason why to do this is many reasons. One is like you said, you can do all kinds of performance things. The runtime has a very clear defined native interface, so you can make native modules, which is very important for us. Like, for example, we just made some bindings we did for our app for FFmpeg for doing like video conversion and stuff like that. So you write a module once for Bear. You bind to the native language. It runs in Node.js and runs in Bear. Then it also runs on the phones immediately, because that's like part of that contract. Assuming like that the phones can run that C library, but honestly, almost always they can. And you never touch that code again, and it's like globally universal everywhere, and that's the true unlock. So like we are iterating so much faster now because we never really think about that bridge of crossing the things. I think people are over fixated on making cross-platform UI things. Kind of like somebody will probably say, well, you can run React Native on the desktop also, and then you can maybe do some of the same things. And like to some degree that's true, but it's also like by overcoupling things to React Native is a UI framework. You're not getting that like massive iteration speed that you get from like making Node.js modules, where Node.js modules is the other way. It's like nothing to do at all with UI, but it's just like making functionalities that then enhance your app and enhances your backend. So we do the same thing with Bear modules. So you just write them once, they run everywhere. By composing your app logic for these modules, you're actually just making an app logic thing that does all kinds of things like image scaling, like I said, or like just run your engine. For us, it's running like a whole peer-to-peer stack. And you literally, it doesn't change it between desktop and mobile or embedded devices. It's exactly the same code. You run it. For us, that's been like one of those like, wow, we went from like working 1x, 10x, now 100x faster. Like, it's crazy how fast we can iterate now, because we never think about, we honestly, and this is like really true, we never think about those boundaries anymore of like, where does this run? We just write it and it runs everywhere. And for the deployment stories and all that, it's just meant that our teams are just so productive, because we have, the way we structure that is like, we have a mobile team, they work on React Native. That's obviously very focused on mobile. We have a desktop team. They work more on like making like web UIs that you do more on desktop through our runtime. And then they all share this Bear code that the third team does that enhances all the apps with all the functionality. And that's like just the best kind of app development I've ever seen. And that's really exciting to me. And it's the first time I've seen just like those two prongs just accelerating that way together as one team, basically. And I think that's the true unlock. And that's again, it takes a little wrapping your head around, but it's like it's really cool.
Yeah, it feels a little bit to me almost like, so people who listen to the show know that I'm primarily actually a back-end developer, and I'm typically working in Ruby on Rails and not on a JavaScript backend. But in fact, that's what I just got a new job doing that for Prize Picks. But what's interesting is with this is it almost feels like you're shipping it with a highly performant localized backend.
Yeah, exactly. And the cool thing is that then by shipping it together, like you make these kind of APIs, but like obviously the latency between your applications kind of like and this thread you're running, the worker in this basically none, right? It's kind of like it's the same device.
Right.
So those kind of overheads disappear. It's very easy to integrate, and again, you get this like integration of all kinds of native enhancements that you want to do for your apps, and it's all through JavaScript and C and C++ because that's what you write the bindings in. And yeah, it's like don't want to come with too many examples, but like for example, like it's a very simple thing we do in our app is like somebody shares a video and we want to generate a preview of that video, and we have that in our desktop app, we have that in our mobile app. And on mobile they use a React Native library, and on desktop they use, I think, some video thing and whatever. And a problem we always had was like, there would be a bug where mobile did it a little bit differently than desktop because there was like differences in the libraries and the stacks. And it would always come back and we'll always come back and we'll always come back. And now we moved it just to like, it's in the Bear worker, it's FFmpeg, it just takes it in, it produces the same thing every time. It's exactly what we want. We tested on desktop, it's 100% the same thing on mobile. We moved on, we never looked back, kind of thing. So it's not even like that anything React Native is doing is wrong, or anything that desktop development is doing wrong, or backend development is doing wrong. It's just that differences slow you down, and they don't need to. And I think that's what's really exciting for me.
Awesome. So I want to talk a little bit about the modules for a minute, because you did mention that you can, for example, Node.js, they use V8, but they've added other things on, right? Because V8 was originally built for Chrome. And so, like you said, like file system, for example, like V8 did not need that for your browser. And so, you've got these other things bolted in. So I'm assuming you just have modules for Bear that do some of those things then?
Yeah. So it's pretty crazy because when you do this kind of like modular development where you kind of like split things up to these like piecemeals, like, say, it's kind of like you can imagine like the tickets in your ticket tracker, like make FS module, make Met module, make it's really easy to implement actually because it becomes so scoped. So our team was originally just 2 people, now it's 3 people, and those 2 guys just went through all the libraries in Node.js and just re-implemented them as modules. So we actually have the entire Node.js standard library just as modules you can pick from the shelf and install.
Right.
But again, you just, the difference is that if you make another module, so let's say you made a module that's like read some file and convert it, instead of you asking the runtime for FS, you just require FS and you install it like you do any other module. That's the only difference.
Right.
So then like the standard library you use is not really a standard library, but like, is basically just the union of what your dependencies use. So super flexible, super easy. And yeah, so we just bang through all of it. We have all of the Node.js ones, but then because it's like, there's no cost to adding anything. There's no like committee where we have to discuss, is this worth adding? Is this like going to make it too bloated? We just add it because you can just choose not to use it. We also added all kinds of other stuff. So we have, for example, like, database bindings to RocksDB if you like that. We use that a lot. Boom, done. You can just import it as anything else. I think we have some Bluetooth stuff now also and other things, like all kinds of things. I know we're working on some USB, interaction libraries also with like USB sticks and stuff. So because there's now that as soon as that cost goes away from maintainability and stuff, it just like it basically all of a sudden by doing nothing you can do more, which I think is really the key to everything.
Yeah, I find that kind of interesting just from the standpoint of, like I said, I primarily do Ruby, but you also see it with Node and Bun and some of these other things where, they have a standard library. Whether they think about it that way or not, you get all this functionality in the language that they've added in to make it useful. But yeah, when you start really thinking about a standard library, especially when the standard library gets large, then it's okay, how does this interoperate with all 8 zillion other things that the system does? Does it add overhead to installation, right, to the app size? Does it add overhead to the running things and doing things, and do I have to check this in order to run that? And so just having those, you still do that with, I'm sure, with your modules, but the difference is that I'm only pulling in the handful of things that I need. And so those are the only things I really have to worry about. And then it keeps my app size small, right, when it bundles the app and all those things. And so I can imagine that it definitely has its payoffs. And to me at least, the thing that stands out here is what we're discussing is not should you use Bear all the time. It's, hey, where does this really come in and brings a host of benefits, and where maybe you still want to use Node or Bun or something else that kind of has the fully functional thing. Or in the case of like React Native, right? You're going to do a whole bunch of the UI stuff in React Native, and then you're going to hand off the things that make sense to Pair or to Bear, sorry. And then you're also probably going to be working through some of the API calls and stuff that you typically do on a mobile app anyway, and probably keep all of that in React Native. And so as it comes together, it makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And I think actually it's interesting to think about. You said React Native. I think UI development is almost like the complete opposite of what I said. I think in UI development, you want to have a lot of stuff being given to you because UI is really stateful. You like by design, like there's buttons and stuff.
Yeah.
You want to not style those. You want things to look based on the device. You want to have that given to you. It's a whole different thing. But this model really shines for like you said, classic backend development. It's just that we kind of like just want to get rid of the definition of backend development. You say, well, it's a worker. It's like how you do your application logic always. And something interesting about thinking about Chrome, like you said there also, I think, because Chrome to some degree does the same thing, right? Because Chrome, sure, it ships with WebRTC and these things, but it's pretty minimal still. Like there's some stuff in there, but it's pretty minimal. It's very like, it doesn't change a lot. It's a big process to change it. When you update your browser, Chrome doesn't ask you; it just updates it because Chrome comes with a guarantee that doesn't matter. They're not going to break things going forward. The reason they can do that is because of that contract.
Right.
Ask anybody who has ever upgraded a Node.js program. And again, this is not Node.js's fault. It's just like something that happens with software. That's every time you upgrade that major, it's like incredibly anxious because you're like, it's probably going to break at that worst possible time because something that one API I used has changed slightly.
Right.
If you instead say, well, the runtimes come with nothing, it's free to upgrade it because it's the same as the Chromium. It's never going to break anything. So we aggressively upgrade our Bear runtime every day just to get that latest V8, get those latest things in because those guys are insane. They're shipping things all the time. So we are always on latest V8 because there's no cost to that. It's not going to break anything. Like they have their contract nailed down. So that just means that you can again also just ship things faster, iterate faster. You're not stuck in that upgrade anxiety. You can kind of park old code just as being old and just bump those majors. So if we want to make a better design for file systems, like only support promises, we just do that. We don't think about it.
Right.
And just finally, like you said there, yeah, I'm a big, big fan of Node.js. I write tons of Node.js. I think Node.js has a big place in the world always. I haven't used much of the other ones because I'm a classic person, but I do think like even saying that, I think the entire, in my opinion, like backend development is going to go towards this like small core model. I think that is the future. It's a little bit harder to market. It's harder to talk about, but the benefits just greatly outweigh the disadvantages.
Right. So we've kind of talked about mobile, and I think the back end story is pretty well understood because, if you're writing Node or something else for your back end, this can sit in there next to it or in place of it. My question is, you also mentioned desktop. So what does this look like on the desktop?
So the cool thing is the code always looks the same because it's just Bear code. We have on desktop, and if you go to our website, bear.pairs.com, we have a installable CLI. That installable CLI is actually just our compilation of Bear. So it's just like it's basically kind of like as minimal of a build of V8 you can get with this module system. So that's the Bear thing.
And Bear is BARE, like naked, not BEAR, like the animal.
Bear, somebody called it the Bear naked runtime. I kind of like that.
Start a band. Call it Bear naked
runtime. And our logo is a bear, like a roar bear, just to make everything more confusing. We like to be smart asses. So you install that one again. You can just install it every day, get the latest one because nothing will ever break. And it's really good, really powerful. And the cool thing is then when you want to like package your app, because this is all self-contained, like that, you can even do stuff like compile this into a single binary, because when there's no standard library, when there's nothing in, that becomes really easy. If we have some examples on that on the website for how to compile that yourself, you just get a binary out like you do with Go, so you can have your entire program in one thing, or you can embed it in other things. For our peer-to-peer runtime Pear, we actually ship our version of Bear, which is just the same thing, just embedded into another thing, because you don't want to ship like many binaries. That's really hard. And that just becomes really easy. And you can even do things like, so it's minimal. It doesn't support TypeScript because it's minimal, but you can easily just go in and make your own distribution that just supports TypeScript by adding that into the thing. So it's really, really flexible, and it sounds really good, and it sounds too good to be true. The only reason that is the case is because it does nothing. So it's very easy to support all the things when you do nothing. It's very hard to do anything when you do anything. Just all it needs to do is support those like module loading, which again is a hard problem, but at least it's like much easier than doing all kinds of things.
Right. So if I were to, I guess the question I'm wondering about, because it sounds like you distribute it in mostly the same way, right? You embed the runtime in whatever it is you're shipping, and then it just runs. It does what it does, or it does what you loaded in on a module and then called. So on a desktop app, what kind of UIs can people put on it? Because
sure. So on a desktop app, if you want, it's kind of like the same story on desktop in general as it would like something like Node. It's like it's not a UI framework. We actually have a native UI framework we built that just binds to like native UI. But that was just to do an experiment. It's not something people should do, but just to see, can you actually make an application that just would load things. So you would, if you wanted to make like an actual desktop app, you would probably use our Pear framework for making peer-to-peer apps, because that's actually what it does. It actually just embeds Bear, adds UI libraries, and uses Bear to load peer-to-peer things, but you can do whatever you want. It's basically similar in a flow to like making an Electron app, if you know that. But you can also make native apps with that, and you can also do the same tricks. I don't know if our tooling works for that yet, but that's definitely on our roadmap to do like a desktop React Native app that uses Bear also. Like we wanted to, it's very easy to embed, so we want to embed it everywhere. I said, we launched it last week, right? So we have a long roadmap, but again, by doing very little, we have a lot of time to do a lot of other stuff, and like this project is moving crazy fast every day. So it's super cool.
Right. So I can install Pear, and it has UI libraries that I can use. That probably do they bind to native UI libraries?
So
they do.
So you can bind to anything if you wanted to through modules. The modules we have right now just makes web views because that's easy. Like, so it's kind of like an Electron like.
Oh, I got you. So I can bind to GNOME or KDE for Linux, or I can bind to.
I don't think there is
UIKit yet, for Mac OS.
Exactly. Like probably a lot of those bindings have to be made for Bear, like as in like you have to make like loop code. That's something we're working on, but like the program itself supports it. We have something that loads like just an Electron web view, because that's easy and that's
that makes sense. And so then it plays the role of the backend for the Electron app in kind of the same way. That makes sense.
Exactly. But we want to take this to the full scale, like, either write those bindings ourselves or the community can do it. But the foundations is there for now. And I think, like I said in the beginning, I think for me, like the most exciting future for JavaScript in general is like actually that it doesn't really run the UI anymore, but it just runs all the backends, because I think that's where JavaScript ironically really shines. It's also good for front end, but it's especially good for backend.
Yeah, it kind of started out doing the front end work, but it was almost a utility to make the front end do what you wanted. And so, yeah, I can kind of see that, and I can definitely see where it shines on the back end. So so what's next for Bear?
Just honestly, let me just turn on the light here, because I can see I'm in Denmark and it gets dark. Let's see if that works. That's a little bit better. So next for us is it's actually really simple, because we have the API now, right? It's the module system. So for us, every time we ship something, we're just making it faster and better. making more modules. For example, I think a really cool success story to how to understand this stuff is like, this is a little bit nerdy maybe, but like when you write things like native add-ons in with V8, and we use V8 mostly. We can run on any engine, but we like to use V8 because it's just a good engine. For example, if you wanted to do some cryptography, you usually make bindings for a crypto library because you don't want to do that in JavaScript, and you call those. People don't realize that calling from JavaScript normally in these engines into like a native library has a cost. Like there's a transaction cost here because it has to go between engines. And that cost means that it's actually harder to program for, because it means that native code you call has to do more stuff to be worth it. So if like, you can imagine if you just made a C program that just added 2 numbers, if that cost is high, then it's not worth it. And then you're like, I need to do more. Kind of like, I don't like those limitations because it messes with how you think about programming. It's like you have like premature optimization and stuff. And the V8 engine that Google makes made a really cool solution for this called fast calls, which is like they have this API where you can do some native stuff, and then you can actually make this basically free. That was very recently added, but because Bear does nothing else except this, the guys just decided to, let's just write bindings for this and expose that through the module system, because again, it's like super flexible, you can do it. And we just added that, and that resulted in our app, Keat, which is like using a bunch of these calls to do cryptography, because peer-to-peer uses a lot of cryptography. Like all those calls became, I think it was like 3x faster, but just like, shipping one Bear thing, like no code changed, right? Just like, because the guys can just focus on this engine part. Every time you make the engine faster, everything becomes faster. So for us, it's just about iterating even more and more of that stuff, like pushing all those bits out of these engines to make everything as fast as possible, stay on very latest V8s, and then just like I said before, expanding the module scope. So we have more and more modules. We want to basically bind to everything. We want to get like bindings for like all those like cool UI libraries you just mentioned. That's a cool project. We want to get that done, and just help people build and help people expand, and also at the same time, like just make it run on everywhere. We're very, very serious about actually deploying this stuff like to light bulbs and stuff in the future. I think that's like, we do peer-to-peer, and peer-to-peer means like connecting things directly. If you think about like smart homes and stuff like that, that's where that stuff is brilliant, because you don't want to send all that data to Google or whatever. So running JavaScript on all your devices, peer-to-peer stack, that's like the perfect world for us. So we're pushing in all kinds of direction on this, but it's just really easy because it's so scoped. So it's awesome.
Right. I had another question, but I get so tied into what you do with this. I forgot where I was going with it. I don't know. It'll come to me in a minute. It was essentially, you said, hey, you can pull in these modules. Typically you have to do like an npm install in order to get those things. And you said that you can use npm to get some of them, but for sort of the fundamental modules that kind of do the basic stuff, like the node level stuff, right? The file system, or whatever other things it has to do. How do those come in? Do you have a separate app store, or they just, you pull them in via npm? Is there some other way, or what?
So because our module system, again, I don't want to get too nerdy, but our module system just follows the same contracts as the node modules, because there's so many node modules, right? It's like amazing. It's probably, I don't know if it is the biggest, but at least it's one of the biggest ecosystems of modules. So we decided like, why we reinvent that? It's perfect. Or at least like the things that are not perfect is like livable. So we just implemented the same thing, which means that if you install something from npm, it normally works. The only time it doesn't work is if it's like, if that module is obviously requiring like the standard library like FS. But then you can, and we have this on our website, you can use a trick to have npm map FS to our FS, which is compatible on APIs right now. And then you can make things work. So our website has a list of all of our mirrored packages of standard libraries, like FS and Node means this and Bear, but it's all just npm modules. You just install them from npm. You would add them to your package JSON, and then I think a really cool thing is that I think this is an ECMA standard. I'm not sure, but like the import map stuff in Node recently in package.json, where you can kind of like describe. I think this was added for browsers originally, so you can say in
Hmm.
this environment load this packages and stuff like that. That makes engineering for multiple runtimes really easy with npm and also Node.js. So you can really easily describe in Bear when loading this thing from Bear, load Bear FS, but in Node load FS, and then your program just becomes very runtime neutral, which is, or at least like they work on Node and Bear, which is like how you want to run things.
Right.
But so yeah, so we just reuse all the existing infrastructure for that because why not? It's awesome. There's a lot of it.
Right. So if I want to use like the FS module, I just npm install what bear fs, bear-fs or something like that.
Yeah, exactly that. And
Oh,
then
okay.
that's just like an open source library, and like it aims to be 100% compat. I'm sure there's slight differences here and there, but like um, and if you want to use like streams, we have the streams implementation. If you want to use et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's like again, it's like there's a little hurdle there. That's the cost of like doing like small core development. Like you have as the first step, and this is why
Hmm.
people don't do it because it's harder to market. You have to like that marketing piece. That first step is annoying, but that's how you get the flexibility.
Right.
And we don't care about marketing. We just make this because it's really cool. So yeah, so that's how we do it. And the cool thing is then if you wanted to install, instead of some of the Node.js stuff, you wanted to install a cool peer-to-peer module, it's the same flow. So you learn this flow once, and that's how you do everything. So how do you get like peer-to-peer modules, how you get HTTP modules, how you get whatever modules you want to write.
Awesome. All right. So yeah, I guess the last question I have before we do picks is if people want to learn more or they want to connect with you, or I mean maybe there's somebody out there who's like, this sounds really great. Sounds like you know what you're doing. I want to hire Hole Punch to make my peer-to-peer app, and I'm not going to do it myself. How do people get connected with you for any and all of that?
So if you go to the website bear.pairs.com, and I think maybe we can share that on the podcast
Hmm.
and as a link, so people don't hear my mumbling. But there's all kinds of contacts in there. We have so it's all open source, permissive licensing. We do everything in the open on this in general. We have our chat up Keat where we do all our chats about implementing Bear in open. There's links on the website to join those. So you can actually just follow it in real time. I don't think you should hire us to make apps. I think we should hire people to work on Bear. So and on peer-to-peer. So maybe that's going into your pick session, but like please reach out if you're interested in working with this stuff. That's a very cool ecosystem. There's very vibrant stuff going on. But yeah, join all the things there. We have a website there. The documentation is very light because it doesn't do much. We have a
Hmm.
very active GitHub and a small team. Cool thing about having a small team is that when you talk to somebody, it's like the pizza problem. You can eat a pizza and the entire team can be in the room. So when you talk to somebody, they probably know everything about the project.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to push us into picks. Now, if you've not listened to the show, picks is just shout outs about stuff we like. I think most of the time it's not technology related, but that doesn't keep us from picking technology stuff when we like it. So I'm going to jump in and do a handful of picks here. My first pick is almost always a board game. And my friends and I last week we played a game called Colt Express. And what it is it actually has a train with cars that it's set up. So it's like a 3D train that sits on the table. And so you've got the locomotive, and then you've got however many players there are. Basically, you put that many cars on the train. And then there's loot on the train, right? So there are little gems, there are bags of money, and there's a lockbox in the locomotive, which is where the sheriff starts. And then what you do is you can move from the car you're in to the roof. You can move laterally from one car to another. You can punch another player because all the players are robbers, train robbers. You can punch another player and that makes them drop loot, or you can shoot another player. And when you shoot them, you add a bullet card to their deck of cards. And bullet cards are basically blanks. right? So they don't have an action associated with them. And when you take any of the other actions, you've played the card. And so when you draw a hand, if you've been shot a lot and you get a whole bunch of bullets, you just don't have as many options. And so you may wind up spending one of your actions to draw more cards to try and get the card you want. And the way it works is you go around the circle and everybody plays a card. And there are different sequences that you can play that maybe they allow you to play 2 cards in a row instead of just one. Or, they allow you to place it face down instead of face up, right? Because if everyone's playing face up, you can sort of plan for what's coming, right? It's like, okay, I know they're going to move here, so I'm going to move there and I'm going to punch them, kind of thing, right? But if you're playing face down, right, then you have an advantage because it's anonymous. Of course, everybody else plays face down. Anyway, so then what you do is once everybody's played for the whole round, so there's usually, you go around the circle like 3 or 4 times. Then you flip them over and you just play it out. So, you play my card and I move. You play his card and he shoots. You play his card and he, right? And so anyway, it's a lot of fun. Board Game Geek weights it at 1.83. I tell people that a 2 is about as complicated as the casual gamers really get. Sometimes a little bit more. But 2 is about where it has enough complexity to make it fun, but it's not so complex that that the people who aren't avid gamers are not going to want to play it. So anyway, so this is a 1.83, so it's reasonably simple game. But yeah, also each player has a character that they're playing, and those characters have special abilities, right? So the one I played, when you punch somebody and make them drop loot, you can catch it, right? You don't have to spend an action to pick it up, on your next move. Other people, like one guy had such a powerful shot that it moved a person back a train car, or all kinds of stuff. So anyway, lots of fun. My buddy had it's like a super box or something, and so it had 2 expansions in it. And the expansions allow you to play this. It's typically 2 to 6 players. His expansion would allow you to play up to 9 players. So anyway, way fun game. Highly, highly recommend it. It came out in 2014, so it's not a new game by any means. But anyway, really, really enjoyed that. As far as other picks go, I finished 1923. It's the Yellowstone spinoff. I really liked Yellowstone. So I watched 1883, which was the first spinoff, right? Kind of the origin story of the family. I have to say, and it was Tim McGraw and Faith Hill were the parents in that one, which, I grew up listening to country music, so I enjoyed that too. But 1883 was terrific. 1923 was even better. And they're both better than Yellowstone, and I really, really, really like Yellowstone. So if you're looking for something to watch, it's on Paramount Plus. And so I'm going to pick that. Speaking of Paramount Plus, one other thing I just figured out is that I didn't realize that Champions League in Europe was running. And so then I was asking questions like, how do I watch it? And apparently those are on Paramount Plus in the US. So I'm going to go watch the finals whenever those are on. And then they also carry Serie A soccer from Italy. So I'm excited about that too. So I think that's mostly all I've got. So Matthias, why don't you go ahead and give us some picks?
Cool. I was actually looking at that Yellowstone show because I don't get a lot of time to watch shows anymore, but I saw that one and I was like, that's interesting. And now I'm going to give it a try because that sounded really, what kind of genre is that? Actually, is that like sci-fi or? It's
a Western, but it's a modern Western. Cool. So the premise of the show is there's a ranch that takes up like half of Paradise Valley in Montana. And it's all owned by one family, and it's been owned for like 100 and something years. And there are all these people who are trying to get a piece of it, right? So the Native American tribe that's there, right? They do all this stuff to like steal cattle in a way that's semi-legal from the ranch. They're like developers that want to build stuff, and that affects the ranch. At one point, eminent domain is claimed, and so they actually take some of the land to build an airport, right? And so they're trying to fight back to keep their ranch. And so I'll warn you, it does get a little bit violent sometimes. There's definitely language. There's a little bit of nudity. If none of that's going to bother you or turn you off, then it is a terrific show. Some of that does bother me, and I kind of wish that it was on VidAngel. I think some of the older seasons are. VidAngel will actually let you, like you can say, don't show me any of the nudity, or, it'll cut the sound for the words you don't want to hear, the curse words. But anyway, it's a really, really good series. I really enjoyed it. So
Nice, I'm gonna check that out. Actually, I love watching a good Western. I watched that show, Darkwood or something. I can't remember. That's like this. It's not called that. There's this big famous Western series I watched on. I think it was on Netflix a while ago. But,
yeah. So most Westerns are like Old West Westerns, and this one gets into like state politics, and there's plenty of shooting and horseback riding and wrangling cows and all that too. But yeah, anyway.
Nice. I don't, like I said, unfortunately, I don't get to watch a lot of TV right now, but because we've been working really hard on this kind of stuff. But I do,
right?
When I have some downtime, so I'm a huge history buff, and anybody who knows me, probably really tired of the fact that I'm history. I'm a very, very big medieval history nerd. I read everything from like year 1000 to like 1200. I don't know why that triggers me in a nice way, because it's like if you don't know about history, it's kind of like we basically don't know. We know about the Roman Empire and all that stuff, and then there's like basically there's like a gap because of all the changes in times, and then around year 1000 is when things actually start getting written down again. So there's like good records around that. And I recently, this is super nerdy, but I recently went on like a deep dive on southern Italy medieval history, and I read a really, really good book series by, I think it's an English author, John Julius Norwich, and it's very old books from like the 60s, but he writes this amazing trilogy about like Sicilian history in the Middle Ages, and it's
interesting.
If you're very nerdy and you're into that kind of stuff, that for me, so I don't read a lot, but that was the kind of book where I just started reading. I couldn't stop, and I ended up actually just almost buying everything that guy made because it's really good. I don't know. Hopefully, he's not controversial or something, because I just read the books, but really, really good stuff, and it's like from a point in time where people move from different countries. Today we're very like what does it mean to be American? What does it mean to be European? But basically in the Middle Ages, and this is like a common misconception, people actually just travel a lot, move from many places to many places.
Yeah.
Whole peoples move from other places to other places. And like southern Italy, for me, I'm from the Nordics, like it has like a history of like Vikings and Viking settling, and like the Roman Empire's history and the Eastern Roman Empire and all that clashing, and like the Middle Ages and all those cultures mixing, and the Arabs, and like becoming like a hub of everything. And obviously you have the Crusades, which is like has a bunch of history, but like that all went through there. So like it's just like that period for me is insanely interesting to read about, because it's just like everything happening at once. And yeah, you should check out that book series by that author if you're into that. There's probably like one person out there that's going to be like, that's awesome, I would love to do that. And if you're into that, just Google the stuff from that, and you'll find all this like really nerdy, really good YouTube content that people made on that about the history of like southern Italy. So that's my nerdy pick for today. And if somebody has good recommendations of any kind of like other deep dives on that, I'm very interested. That's my period I'm very fixated on. So very, very cool stuff.
Very cool. Yeah, I lived in Italy for a couple of years, and
oh really? Which part of Italy?
Mostly in the north, actually. So you're talking about areas that I didn't see, but
I live in the south of Switzerland. I live very close to northern Italy. Obviously, it's like 10 minutes drive from us. So
yeah. So I was a missionary there. The furthest north I got was Pordenone and Verona, but where I actually lived. But I mean, we went up into Trento and Bolzano and some of those that are kind of up that way. So
Yeah, it's like that area, obviously, like, but like that's just so rich of all kinds of history, all places, like, yeah, like the
yeah,
church and like the peoples, and different,
yeah,
like,
that stuff is
history.
all so fascinating.
Yeah, and
Well, and you get into the 1800s when Italy formed as a country as we know it now. I mean, again, there were like 3 or 4 kingdoms, and
yeah,
I mean, all of the different factors that went into it. And yeah, there were people from the church that played a pretty major role in Italy coming together as a country. Yeah, it's really really interesting. So
yeah, it's kind of like, again, if you know, is I think people like to like, you read about the Romans and that kind of stuff, but it's like you can keep diving, and you can get more and more niche, and like it's all these
oh
areas,
yeah,
and like with the popes, and also like the history of the South, that's like a huge interlap there, and like with different
yep,
massively important events that's basically shaped the entire history of the Western world. I think that's like insanely
yep,
fascinating. So yeah,
yeah.
definitely.
I don't think people know that like the popes had their own kingdoms down there for centuries.
Yeah, big
Just
kingdoms
yeah,
also, like yeah.
yeah. So very very interesting. And yeah, southern Italy especially. Yeah, like you said. I mean, they got invaded by everybody on the Mediterranean and some outside the Mediterranean, like you mentioned, the Vikings. So, I mean, it's interesting too because people from southern Italy actually look different from people from northern Italy, and
Yeah, and
and
it's
it's
like, when you travel in Italy, also, it's kind of like you can kind of through the food you can sense when those boundaries
yeah,
change. Like the southern food is very different than the northern food, even
yeah,
though it's and like that's and like the Arabic culture in Sicily, and like they have amazing,
yeah,
Arabic chocolate and things like that. Like yeah, it's a
hmm
crazy, beautiful place, and like, yeah, rich in history also.
yeah. In some ways, some of the stuff is homogenous, right? So, there are things that are generally true of Italy, including in within the food, but then every region has their own take on a lot of that stuff too. And so then it's okay, well, they're making kind of the same dish, but they've got their own flair, right? They put a different meat or spice or something else in it, or they eat it with a different kind of bread, or I mean, anyway, it's really really fun and fascinating to get into. The
So if
dialects
anybody
vary widely across the country. I mean, it's really really, yeah, it's fun.
if anybody's watching this, probably not, but like is in like an executive producer at Netflix or something, please make a show about that whole region, about like those time periods. I'll watch all of it.
Oh,
I'm sure
right, right, yeah,
it's really missing. It's a huge missing gap in like this overproduction of all things. Like there's so many intense, straight to TV movie, amazing
hmm,
stories about this region, like with the popes and all that stuff. And somebody needs to make that, I think.
yeah,
So
absolutely. All right, well, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap us up, but this was fun, and I kind of love the meandering historical discussion that we. It's I mean, but I totally in this not just for the technology, but for the people and the interests, and I feel like a lot of times we kind of forget to go beyond the technology into what makes the people in the ecosystem just so interesting. So yeah, so thanks for opening up on the stuff that you're interested in beyond tech, because that's fun. And yeah, we'll wrap up here. Till next time, folks. Max out. All right, let me